Introduction from myself. I'm Claire Leggett. Hopefully most of you know me. I work at Derby and Derbyshire LMC, and I'm the director of the GP Task Force, which is a company that the LMC host, which provides all of the great services around resilience and retention, and all the different fellowship programs that we've been offering. I hope that you access all of our GPTF support, whether that's bespoke individual practice support or career support, preceptorship, mentorship, coaching. We've got an absolute array of services for practices and practitioners to enjoy. I know that some of you are also booked onto our practice manager webinar, which is next week with Rachel. There's 40 places and they're fully booked, and there is a waiting list for that. And yeah, if you are struggling at all and need some support, then please get in touch with us at the office. Well, that's what we're here to do. So tonight we invited Dr. Rachel Morris to talk to us around beating burnout and thriving in the workplace. And pass over to Rachel. I'm very privileged to have you. Thank you and welcome to Derbyshire.
Thank you. Oh, thanks so much, Claire. Really good to be here. And just thank you so much for all coming, because I know it's a rainy Monday, and I know that the workload in general practice is just ramping up and up and up. So well done for being here, and hi to everyone who's watching this at a later date, watching the recording. So just to introduce myself a little bit more, I'm Rachel. I'm a GP turned executive and team coach, and I do a lot of coaching and training all around resilience and productivity and wellbeing. I'm also director of leadership courses for Red Whale, that's GP Update Limited, and I host the podcast called You Are Not a Frog, which is just for GPs and other healthcare professionals in high stress jobs. So welcome everybody to the webinar. It's great to see you all. I'd like to start off with a question, and if you feel comfortable, please pop in the chat. How many of you have been worried at some point in your career about your own level of stress and burnout? If you've ever been worried about your own level, then just put a yes in the chat. It's interesting for me just to see if anybody has, and yet we're immediately getting lots of yeses. Okay, a tsunami of yeses, because I know that I certainly have worried about my own levels of stress and burnout. And you know, the stats back this up, don't they? So a study in the British Journal of General Practice in 2019 showed that 94% of GPs are suffering from mild or severe exhaustion, which is huge amounts. And I think you can probably extrapolate that to practice managers and practice nurses as well. And when I was sort of preparing for some courses I've put together, I interviewed a load of GPs across the spectrum, and I got these quotes which are quite telling, really. One of them was, by the end of the day, I'm emotionally battered, using all my strength, mental energy to survive. I'm left clinging to the desk for dear life. And I wonder if any of you have ever felt like that. And then on top of that, we've then got the coronavirus pandemic, and you know, across the nation, 37% of adults say that the coronavirus pandemic has affected their well-being. Now that was in June, so I dread to think what it's like now. And 56% of workers report being more anxious and stressed about work, and apparently the rate of depression has now doubled. So coronavirus is bringing with it its extra stuff, and I think there's a lot of reasons for this, but one of the reasons I think is decision fatigue. I mean, how many new processes and procedures have you had to put in place in your practices just to keep things safe and just to sort of get things done? So you know, so there's decision fatigue. We're putting a lot of pressure on ourselves to make smart, safe choices for our families, our communities, and this can lead to pandemic-specific burnout. And also, a lot of the things that we would normally do to keep ourselves well and keep ourselves functioning, well, we can't do when we're in a position of lockdown. And you know, we're just about to go into lockdown again, aren't we? Another 4 weeks. Who knows, it might well be more. And some of the stuff has started to come back, like I could go to the gym and I could play tennis, but I won't be able to do that next week. So a lot of the stuff that we do to keep ourselves mentally and physically fit is disappearing for a little bit. And we may be, some of us, putting a bit of a pressure on ourselves, saying, well, in lockdown, I've got to learn a new skill or I've got to do a new thing. And that can actually even exacerbate burnout. So there's all these different things going on And you've got this problem of being always on. I know that some people are working from home, but many of us are on the front line. And actually, even if you're on the front line, you're still on the screen quite a lot of the time doing video consultations or having meetings. And it's a real thing, this Zoom fatigue, this virtual meeting fatigue, because you feel like you're having to perform for the camera all the time. And many people are having to stay at home or doing half and half, and you get this feeling that you're working from home, or as I like to call it, living at work. And then over the summer, we were having to do homeschooling. And I know that some people who have kids in bubbles and there's COVID cases are again having to do homeschooling, having to care for others. We've got all these new processes. We've got the anxiety of uncertainty. So there's certainly a lot that can cause burnout. There's quite a lot to be stressed out. And I wonder how many of you feel that you're at the moment running on empty. So I think at the beginning of the COVID crisis, a lot of us were running on adrenaline, but after a while that adrenaline has sort of gone down a little bit, and it's harder to do those things that are going to replenish ourselves. And there was a very interesting report, I'm sure lots of you read it, by Professor Michael West and Dame Denise Coyer from the GMC in November 2019, all about the well-being of doctors. And they concluded the medicine's a tough job, but we make it far harder than it should be by neglecting the simple basics in caring for doctors' well-being and the well-being of our healthcare staff. I don't think this is right. I don't think that we shouldn't be able to look after ourselves and our colleagues in the same way that we look after our patients. And of course, it's not that we don't want to, it's just we're so overwhelmed with the workload that often it's really hard to know even where to start. And I think one way of sort of looking at what's going on is by looking at the Yerkes-Dodson curve, called the pressure performance curve. And I'm sure many of you have seen this already. And this curve was developed in, I think, the 1920s, and it just tells us what happens to us under pressure. So as the pressure increases, our performance does increase a little bit. So you can see from the graph, as the pressure on the x-axis increases, so our performance goes up. And you can all think of, I can think of my teenage son who's not back at school till tomorrow, and he lay on the sofa today and did absolutely nothing. So human beings need a little bit of pressure to perform, but at some point we get to the point where we've got just enough pressure for our performance to be at its peak. Now, wouldn't it be great if, as the pressure increased, our performance just went up and up and up and up? But unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. As the pressure increases, we just start to tip over the top. Our performance starts to go down. And then if you go far enough along, you start to become ill and you start to face burnout. So you can see these four distinct areas of this curve. First of all, not enough to do, you're bored. And that's also known as rust out. The second area is peak performance. So you've got just enough pressure. The third area is, it's just getting, I think the performance is suffering. And the fourth area is where you're heading towards burnout. Now, I'd like you to have a look at this and rate where you think many of your colleagues are, and maybe put a number in the chat for me. Right now, if you could take a snapshot of general practice primary care, which area do you think most of your colleagues are in? Are they in area 1, 2, 3, or 4? Do pop that in the chat, because I find that really interesting. Okay. And this is interesting because this has changed from webinars I was doing a month or two ago when we were getting 2s and 3s, but I'm seeing 3s and 4s because things have really ramped up. And we need to be careful, don't we? Because obviously at the bottom of that curve is burnout. And just a quick tip, if you're wanting to have good conversations with your teams about where they are, you can get people to rate themselves on this curve. Because if they put themselves in the middle, then it's obvious they're probably okay. But if they put themselves just slightly starting to go into area 3, then maybe the pressure is getting to them a bit, and you then need to have a conversation about what they can do to get themselves back up to number 2. Because I think a lot of people are just feeling like this hamster on a wheel, that you work as hard as you can just to get the basic job done, and then you get home, sort out the family, only to go back and do it all over again the next day. And the problem is, this isn't a new problem. This has been going on for several years. As we know, there's a massive problem with recruitment and retention in general practice. And there was a study in 2016 in the BJGP that looked at the reasons why GPs under the age of 50 were leaving the NHS for different jobs. And overall, the main reason was that they were worried about the effects of their jobs on their well-being. So they were leaving. And in this study, they compared GPs to frogs in boiling water. They said that if you put a frog in a pan into cold water and you heat it up slowly, it won't notice. And I think that's what happened. You know, the workload has gone up slowly, 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 but now the pan is at boiling point. Because obviously if you put a frog in the boiling water straight away, it will hop out. But lots of us have been in the boiling water for a while now, and we think sometimes that we only have two choices. One is to stay in that pan and be boiled alive and burn out, or we just need to leave. But the good news is, and this is what the podcast is about, the good news is that you're not a frog, okay? There's lots of things that you can do to take control, to actually make small changes, and to mean that you're not going to burn out. Because I really believe that it shouldn't be a choice between thriving at work and thriving at home. I really believe we should be able to do both. So today I'm just going to present to you a few concepts that I have found really helpful in my own resilience, and I've shared with teams of healthcare professionals, teams of doctors, and teams outside healthcare. And they're based on coaching and productivity tools, and they just help us take control over things that we need to take control of. Because actually, another quote from GPs, you know, I don't want to stop being a GP. I don't want to stop my work. I just want a bit more control back, bits that make my life disappear to go. And there's this feeling of having all the responsibility and none of the control. So the first shape I'd like to share with you is the zone of power. Now, this shape, I think, carries a little bit of a health warning with it. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen the Matrix. Just put Matrix in the chat if you've seen the Matrix. I think, can everybody see the slides? Claire, can you see the slides okay? Just give me a nod if you can. Okay, brilliant. So people can. If you've seen the Matrix, you'll know what I'm talking about when you're talking about the choice between the red and the blue pill. So the Matrix is a brilliant film where the world has been taken over by machines, and the machines feed off human beings, and human beings are all plugged into a matrix which basically feeds off their body. Now, in order to keep the humans happy, they plug their brains into a virtual reality world. And a group of humans that managed to escape the matrix go and find Keanu Reeves, who's basically plugged into this virtual world, and give him a choice. They say, well, we could give you a blue pill, in which case you will stay in blissful ignorance. You'll be living in the matrix, you'll be in this virtual reality world, which isn't brilliant, but you'll be ignorant of the truth. Or we can give you a red pill that's going to tell you the difficult truth about what you're experiencing. The problem is that once you learn the truth, you can't unsee it. And I think this zone of power is a bit like experiencing the difficult truth here. For me, once you've seen it, it's very difficult to unsee it. And basically the zone of power goes like this. Imagine this slide is the whole of your life, okay? And that circle in the middle is the things in your life that you've got control over. So, for example, I have control over what I ate for breakfast this morning. I don't have control over what my children ate for breakfast this morning. I have control over what cereals I buy and have in the house. So I don't have control over the traffic. I don't have control over the coronavirus pandemic. I don't have control over government policy. I don't have control over what my partners say and do or think. I don't have control over what other people think of me. I don't have control over what you think of me looking at this now. I have control over what I say and what I do and how I respond and the sorts of conversations I choose to have. I have control over when I choose to work, and I have control over what I do when I'm at work. So the zone of power is all about taking control over the things that you have control over. And by the way, something that I meant to say earlier, that if you have any questions as we go along, then do put them in the chat. And Claire's keeping an eye on the chat, so that if there's anything, she's going to wave at me, and we're going to stop and discuss it as we go along. Now, the thing about the zone of power is that if you focus on things that you have no control over, you will become stressed. Okay, I'm sure you can think of people that are getting really stressed about the government, really stressed about this or that, about stuff that they cannot control. And that's a really tricky space to be in, because if we have no control over things, we can't do anything about it. If you want to be resilient, if you want to be powerful and productive, then what you need to do is stay in your zone of power. Those two circles are exactly the same size. But if you are concentrating on what you can control, what you can do, then you start to see what choices you've got. you can see what you can do and the different things you're doing. So we've got a question here. Are you saying the slide represents the whole of your life? Okay, some people are seeing the slides, some people aren't. If you're having problems seeing the slides, then sometimes if you just click on view, you can see them a little bit better. Okay, so we need to stay in our own zone of power. So one thing you can do, and you might want to ponder on this after this webinar, is think of a stressful scenario that you're currently experiencing at work where you're feeling a bit stuck. And then think about actually what's in my power and what's not in my power. And then if you're looking at what's in your power, you think about what choices do I have? What could I do differently? If you start to focus on the choices that you have, you actually suddenly realize that there's some things that you could do that you've not thought about doing already. So I'm going to be mentioning the zone of power as we go through the webinar. So what we can do is take control of our well-being. We can take control of our time, control of our stress, and control of our working life. And that's what I'm going to focus now for the rest of the webinar. So firstly, take control of our well-being. What can we do about this? Well, first is the vortex of busyness. So when I was developing the course for Red Whale, I helped author and then presented the Lead Manage Thrive course, and we had a publishing deadline. So we had an awful lot of articles to get ready in a very small space of time, and I didn't really have enough time to do it. So what I started to do, I put my children into extra childcare. I stopped going to my exercise class. I started staying up really late to do the work. And soon I noticed that I was waking up really early in the morning, just thinking about all the things that were going on. Everything was going through my head. I started getting really tired and a bit jittery. I started to feel a bit tearful. I felt that all joy had gone out of life, even though I really loved the work that I was doing. And soon I realized that I was actually going down the vortex of busyness. And unfortunately, at the bottom lies burnout. So I'd just like you to think now, I'd like you to write down and in the chat, if you don't mind, what's the first thing that you stop doing that really re-energizes you when the workload goes up and up and up? So what is the first thing that you stop doing that re-energizes you when the workload builds up? For me, it's doing exercise and seeing my friends. What is it that you stop doing when the workload builds up and up? I'm just going to give you 10 seconds to write that down. So lots of people saying exercise and gym. Claire, what's the first thing you stop doing?
Yeah, it's the same. It's exercise, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Walking the dog. Yeah. Exercise, seeing friends. Absolutely. So that's often people give up hobbies or, you know, their prayer and meditation, socializing, seeing friends, eating well. Okay. What I'd like you to do now is that thing that you've all written down. I would like you to rate it on a scale of 1 to 3. So 1 is not particularly important for my well-being. 2 is pretty important for my physical and mental well-being. And 3 is vitally important for my physical and mental well-being. Yep. So what have we got here? Lots of 3s here. Okay. So if you do one thing after this webinar, if you learn one thing, it's that thing you've written down. Put that in your diary and schedule that in for the next few days. Okay. And then the next week, and then the week after that, and then the week after that. Because I'm sure I don't need to remind you that burnout is not a pretty thing. And as we know from our patients, people come in, we sign them off sick with stress and burnout, and often they're off sick for 6 months or 9 months or more. And I'm sure many of us have had colleagues who have gone off with burnout. And just to remind you, burnout is characterized by lack of empathy. You feel that you're absolutely knackered, you're completely fatigued, and then you have actual or perceived poor performance. So poor performance, lack of empathy, and fatigue. And that's very different from stress. So stress is a very high energy state where you're going on and you're doing things and you're feeling very anxious. Burnout is when your get up and go has just got up and gone. So you're feeling absolutely exhausted and it takes a while to recover from. So just to say, if that's you or you're spotting that in one of your colleagues, please go and get some help. Don't do this alone and don't suffer in silence. So what do we do? How do we get out of the vortex of busyness? Well, we need to reverse the cycle and we need to actually put some of the well-being factors to stop us going down that vortex. Now, these are the 8 well-being factors, and I'm not going to go through all of them in great detail because I'm sure you're healthcare professionals, you know a lot about all of these, but you know, it's important that you have all of these in a really good balance in your life. And, you know, connecting with other people, really, really important. It's actually one of the most powerful factors. So when we stop seeing our friends, that's the first thing that actually is really powerfully protecting us that we stop doing. Giving is really important in terms of life satisfaction. It's actually, you get a lot more happiness from giving than you do from receiving. Now, learning and playing is something that could get us into the state known as flow. So flow is where time stands still, you're completely engrossed in an activity, and that's very, very good for our mental health. Now, noticing is everything to do with mindfulness, being in the present moment, being grateful. And one of the quickest ways I know to try and rewire your brain and notice more is to keep a gratitude journal. So just think of 3 things every evening that you're grateful for and write them down. And soon you'll find that your brain starts to get rewired. You start to look around and look during the day for things that you're grateful for. So that's a really good way of noticing more. And of course, any form of mindfulness or prayer is very good to help you notice. Being active, oh my goodness, so important to keep active, particularly through lockdown, particularly when we're just staring at a screen for hours on end, and it will massively improve your performance too. Sleeping well, there's a lot of evidence now about the importance of sleep, and if I could just recommend a book called Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, if someone could put that in the chat, that would be really helpful. And then, of course, eating well, and someone's already mentioned eating well that they give up. And then setting boundaries, because unless you set some boundaries, like when are you going to leave work, when are you going to stop looking at emails, all those sorts of things, how are you ever going to be able to do your way to well-being? I've noticed a question here from Sophie. Can learn and play be revising, or is it more hobbies based? So that's a really good question. It depends what you're revising for, I would say. So the sort of learning I'm talking about is the sort of learning that gets you into flow. So anything that will get you into the state where time is standing still, where everything stops, that you're really enjoying yourself. So learning a new skill is one of the quickest ways to get into flow, and so is playing. So that sort of thing is really important. But one of the factors about learning is that actually, according to Maslow's hierarchy, people need to self-actualize. We need to reach our potential. So learning, if you haven't got time to learn any other way, learning through your job, finding something new that you can do at work is really good as well. So, I mean, it depends if it feels like a chore. If revising feels like an absolute chore, then it's probably more like work than learning, but you'll know. And Mary Lou's put, yeah, Why We Sleep, Matthew Walker, it's a really good read, and I really do think that all GPs should read that book. And my one top tip for sleeping is, you know what we all do before our sleep? So we get on our phones, don't we, to set our alarms. And then once we've got on our phone, what happens? Oh, hang on, let me check my texts, and let me check my emails. And oh, what am I doing tomorrow? And I've done half an hour extra of work. So my top tip for sleeping is to buy an alarm clock and charge your phone downstairs. And anyone who's been on any of my courses, that's hopefully the one thing they go away with, is the need to go and get a cheap alarm clock. So I think during COVID, this can be particularly difficult, these different ways to well-being. And I always say, I think that these are the 3 things you really, really need to focus on. Being active, so just getting yourself up and moving around at least, you know, once, twice, 3 times a day, as much as you can, because we are all in danger of just, my back is killing me, because I'm just sat in front of the screen all day. So I get up and walk around as much as I can. We need to take a break, because actually when you have, I know this obviously doesn't sort of count for practice managers who are sort of always on the go doing different things, but as a GP, I know you had surgeries, and then you'd have your breaks, wouldn't you, in your lunch hour and things like that. But if you've just got a long list of phone calls now, or virtual calls, they're not necessarily scheduled in. So you're going to have to schedule in those breaks. And those of you that are practice managers, make sure you are scheduling breaks and time between meetings, because breaks will switch your brain from focus mode, where your brain went very linear, to this diffuse mode, where you start to become much more creative and you solve problems. So taking breaks will make you more productive, it will make you more creative, and it will make you solve problems. That's a really good reason to do a break. And when you're on your break, don't just sit there on your phone, do something that will just turn your brain into a bit of a different state. And then finally, connecting.
Sorry, Rachel, what do you think about Connect at a time where people are missing that physical contact with teams, if they're remote working, for example?
I think connecting is really, really hard. This is something I've been advising teams to do as a 5-minute check-in chat, because what I've noticed is that people's team meetings have become very process focused and very process orientated. And actually, I don't know the last time I was in a GP meeting where we sat and went, how are you? Or we just dived into the work. So I think you need to be more proactive about connecting. So you can't obviously all be in the coffee room at the same time at the moment because of social distancing. So you're going to have to work out how else you can do it, maybe in 2s and 3s, or jumping on virtual coffee breaks with people. Just find a way of getting that connection that you would have done normally in your sort of informal, what I call water cooler conversations. And if you're leading a team and you have team meetings, then just spend 5 minutes at the beginning asking these 4 questions of everybody. So how are you? Really? What are you worried about? Because like, we're all worried about something at the moment, aren't we? And actually just getting it out there is really helpful. And then ask what's going well, because there are lots of things that are going well. I mean, I think general practice has been remarkable, the way people have pulled together and the changes that they've made. And I just think been absolutely brilliant. So what has been going well? And then what do you need? And people can just express what they need, because I think at the moment, people's needs are incredibly different. You know, it depends whether you're, you know, at home with lots of children under the age of 5, or whether you're living on your own, or, you know, what is it that you need at work? Are you worried about your own health? Are you potentially shielding? Have you got elderly relatives? What is it you need? So we need to be asking people. And there's just a little word of warning on the other side of the screen is, if you're the team leader, don't feel that you have to fix it, okay? Because there are some things that you can't fix, but often just listening is enough. And sometimes the rest of the team can offer support and try and help out as well. Does that answer your question, Claire?
Yeah, thank you.
About the connection, but you're going to have to be proactive in connecting. It's not going to come very easily at the moment. So that's the well-being. So let's now look at how we take control of our time. Because I don't know anybody that works in primary care that tells me that they are bored or got an excess of time or haven't got enough to do. And certainly this was before COVID. You know, I sit there in consultations thinking, I can't get my head around the amount of pressure and the expectations that are really unrealistic. And this is where I think we need to start prioritizing a lot better, because what I don't want to be doing is telling you how to fit more and more in your day. That's not what this is about. This is about helping you actually eliminate stuff and get rid of the stuff that's unimportant, and really focus on the things that are important, because most people have got too much to do. And most GPs that I know have got too many roles and trying to do too many things, often off the side of a desk during lunch hour. And we vastly underestimate the amount of time it takes us to do anything. I was coaching a GP once, and she said to me, oh, I just want to be more time efficient, because I'm really inefficient when I'm on call. And we spoke for a bit, and it turned out that in her on-call session in the morning, she did a normal surgery and was given 4 phone call catch-up slots to deal with 20 phone calls. I mean, there was no way she was ever going to be able to fit that in. So it wasn't about making her faster. It was about trying to work out how the day works so that she can get the work done that she needs to. So using the prioritization grid can be quite helpful. And this is a very simple, urgent, important matrix. And all you need to do is just draw a cross and put urgent in the first column, not urgent in the second column, and important along the top, and not important along the bottom. Now, if you've got time later, just encourage you to do one of these grids and see what you've got. And I think that you'll find that actually most of your stuff tends to go in the urgent, important box, you know, things that are cropping up, complaints that you've got to deal with. Emma said she loves the Boston these matrices that are really helpful. But most people find that all their stuff is going in the urgent, important matrix. It's quite difficult to think of stuff that's not important, but there's stuff that's maybe cropping up that's important for other people, that crops up urgently, but not important for you. But the place where you really need to be keeping an eye on is the box on the top right, which is the box that's not important, not urgent, but is important. Now, that's all the stuff like team development and strategy. It's like doing your CPD, you know, writing, being able to delegate to people, writing out processes, looking at plans, planning, and all that sort of stuff. That is where your zone of power lies. That's where your control lies. And I think if we're honest, a lot of you may find that there's a lot of stuff in your urgent and important box that actually started off in the other box. It started off being not urgent, but because you've left it, it becomes urgent. I think of my appraisal paperwork and why I'm always up till 4 in the morning doing my appraisal paperwork the night before it's due. Actually, I realized that was ridiculous because I'd had a year to sort it out. And what I did is I planned to spend a bit of time. I researched a good app and I started doing my appraisal paperwork as I went along with my CPD. So there are things you can do to stop stuff always popping out, but it means being a little bit more proactive. Now you'll notice on this diagram, we've really shrunk those bottom 2 boxes of stuff that's not important. And the Covey Foundation have done a bit of research. They found that most people spend 30 to 40% of their time at work doing stuff that just isn't important. And that's a huge amount of time. And it even applied to healthcare professionals and people who worked in urgent industries such as paramedics. Paramedics spent 20 to 30% of their time doing stuff that wasn't important. And, you know, if we could just eliminate even 5% of that stuff or even 10% of that stuff, that would give us more time to spend in that other quadrant. But it's all about what we're going to focus on and how we can focus on fewer things but better. And this is another, there'll be book recommendations all through this webinar. This is another book recommendation called Essentialism. I love this book, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less, and one of its straplines is doing fewer things but better, because most of us are hugely overcommitted and we try to do too much. And there are 3 truths of essentialism. One is about choosing to do things. You know, what is it that you're choosing to do? And actually, there are only a few things that really, really matter. And I think we've learned that, haven't we, over the last few months? The last few months of lockdown taught us anything, that there are only a few things in life that are really important. And then the final thing is, you know, I can do anything. You know, we can all do anything. We're all pretty intelligent human beings, but we can't do everything. We all only have 24 hours in a day. And if we want to do things well, we need to do fewer things. So that means that we need to eliminate some stuff from our schedules if we can. We need to automate some things if we can. So me finding that app for my appraisal paperwork, that meant it was automated. It was automatically done for me. And there are lots of systems that can actually help with automating stuff, from macros on your screens to just, if you're giving the same old advice in an email so many times, just write that into an email signature and use that email signature. So how can you automate things that you're doing regularly? And then of course, delegation is your friend. And I think we're particularly bad in general practice at delegating. We feel guilty if we delegate. We feel that we're dumping work on other people, but actually delegation to people can be a real gift to them. I know times when people have delegated stuff to me, it was a real opportunity for growth and development. But the problem with delegation is it takes a long time, doesn't it? You know, you need to check up, you need to work out what the process is, you need to check up, you need to make sure it's safe. But just encourage you to delegate as much as possible, but you'll need to set aside time to plan how to delegate. Now, there's some more productivity hacks on this screen. So prioritization, and there's another really good book called Free to Focus by Michael Hyatt. And in it, he suggests every day that you set 3 priorities about your 3 things that you are going to accomplish that day. And I know, obviously, if you have a surgery, you've got to see your patients and all those things, but you will always have other stuff that you're trying to accomplish. Don't try and do too much. And then, of course, actually, when we're working, how productive are we? We have all these distractions that are pinging in and taking our focus. Now, when we focus, when we're in deep focus and we get an interruption, like something pinging into your screen and you're distracted, it will then take 23 minutes for you to get into the same deep focus that you were in before. So the first thing is, I will say, is turn off all your distractions and particularly your notifications. Do you need those email notifications pinging in to your top right hand side of the screen? Do you need your notifications pinging on your phone or on your home screen? Because every time you see that, it will just distract you from your tasks, from what you're doing. And I know it's difficult in a surgery when people are sort of banging on your door all the time, but see if you can get some time where you are free of interruption. Put a sign on your door saying, do not interrupt me, and Kate, unless it's dire emergency or something, so you can actually put your head down and get into the deep work that you need to do. Do you need to check your email 20 times a day? maybe 5 times a day would be enough. And do your best work at the best time. So I know obviously often we're time bound and we're time scheduled because of surgeries and stuff like that, but most of us actually work best in the morning. Some of us work best in the evenings, but I work best in the mornings. So I know that when I start my computer up, I may quickly check my emails just to see if there are any, thing urgent that needs dealing with, but then I will turn off my emails and I will then do my deep work. I'm mainly preparing stuff and preparing content and writing stuff. And then I'll get to emails after lunch when I'm in a bit of a post-lunch dip where my attention is dipped, because emails are very low quality tasks that you can just do. And then batching is really, really helpful. I got this tip from Dr. Gandhi, who's, I think it's one of your Derbyshire GPs, who does his EGP learning pod blast, which are really brilliant. Loads of really good productivity tips there. And he says, if you batch things together, so if you're looking at results, do them all at once. If you're answering complaints letters, do them all at once. Or, if you're doing a certain task, if you batch them together, then you're not being distracted between different tasks. And that can be really, really helpful. There's a question about System 1 on the chat. I won't be able to answer that, but if anyone has got any answers for that, then please answer Naomi. So those are just a few productivity hacks. If you have your own, do stick them in the chat. I'll be interested to hear that. Claire, have you tried any of these?
I think you've just described most of my bad habits, actually, Rachel. In terms of working around distractions and emails, etc., and constantly feels like you're firefighting. And I guess the problem is when you've been ingrained for so long in working in this style of firefighting and sort of being distracted and living on the edge all the time, these sort of productivity hacks are great. And I guess it's really about being ultimately disciplined and well practiced to put them into place. Any tips for that?
Well, I think it's interesting because when we are distracted, it's often not external distractions. It's often internal distractions. Just thinking, I'll just check my emails, or I'll just check WhatsApp. And there's another really good book called Indistractable by Nir, Nireyal. And I heard about that from a podcast from Rangan Chatterjee. His Live Well, Feel Better podcast, or I think that's what it's called. And if you look on the one, there's a podcast from him where he talks about the book, and he talks about the fact that when we are distracted, it's often because we've got to a bit of a difficult bit in what we're doing, and our brains just go, I'd like to do something else, and we reach for our phone and just check the phone. So often it's internal, and we need to just sort of hack that back. So one thing you can do, I don't know if it's your phone, Claire, that gets you, or checking your emails, but there's an app called the Forest app where you can grow a tree on your phone as long as you don't touch it. So that stops you from checking. Or just one quite helpful thing is to use the Pomodoro technique, which is to allocate 25-minute your time into 25 minutes and then have a 5-minute break. And that seems quite good for our brains. We can concentrate for about 25 minutes and then you have 5 minutes off, go and make yourself a cup of tea or do something else. Then you come back for 25 minutes. And during that time, say, well, I'm not going to do anything else. And that seems to be long enough. So it's about habits and things like that. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it's putting off a job that you don't want to tackle.
Yes, I think there's a lot. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So let's go to the taking control of our stress now. This is an interesting one, because I think a lot of us are reacting badly to things, and actually, stress comes from our thinking about things. It doesn't come from the actual events. It comes entirely from how we're reacting and thinking about things. And under increased stress, we have increased circulating cortisol. That shrinks our prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the rational human thinking bit of your brain that makes decisions and lays down memories and is responsible for, rational decisions and impulse control. Cortisol also shrinks your hippocampus, which is your emotional regulation bit of your brain. And it increases the size of your amygdala. And your amygdala is something that isn't particularly helpful, because the amygdala, it kept us safe while we were living in caves. So the amygdala will detect threat, basically. It will detect a physical threat. So if you're about to be eaten by a bear, it will detect a hierarchical threat. So if you're being challenged by the alpha male, and it will also detect a threat of the group threat. So if people don't like you, because when we're living in caves, if the group didn't like you and you got chucked out of the group or the tribe, then you would probably die of exposure or be eaten by a bear or both. So this this group threat, we feel like a physical threat. We feel it the same as if we're just about to be run over by a bus. That's why we respond to a difficult email in the same way as we're just about to be run over by a bus. And so our amygdala is constantly thinking of things that are threatening to us. And I have a friend who's a mindfulness teacher, and I know a lot of you have heard me say this before, but she says to me, "Oh, Rachel, you just need to be more gazelle." I said, "More gazelle? What on earth do you mean? What do you mean?" Well, if a gazelle is eating grass and a lion comes along, what does it do? Runs off, doesn't it? Not a trick question. When the lion is gone, what does the gazelle do? Goes back to eating grass, doesn't it? Now, if I was that gazelle, I'd be going, "Oh, did you see the lion, and did you see his hair? And what if it comes back tonight and eats my babies, and I'm never going to be able to sleep now because, oh my goodness, I've got that presentation tomorrow and it's going to be awful." So I'm constantly pre-living and reliving stuff that hasn't even happened. And what that does, it puts me into my threat zone, which is my fight, flight, or freeze zone. And when I'm in that zone, I don't behave very well. I remember I was on call once and it was 5 minutes to 6, phones go over at 6, so I knew I'd have been safe at 6. I had a call from my childminder who she said, "Rachel, can you come and get your daughter because one of the other children is really ill, I need to take them to hospital." So I was getting everything together, really trying to get going. And of course I had a phone call from urgent visit at 2 minutes to 6 that came in. And it was a lady who lived with her elderly mum, had woken up in the morning, her mum had been quite ill, lady had gone off to work, came home, her mother was even worse, so she was asking for an urgent visit. And I got on the phone and I said, "Well, what do you mean by ringing me at this time of the day? And what am I supposed to do now? And how dare you go to work?" And at that point, I really wasn't the doctor that I wanted to be. And I'm sure that you can all think of times at work where you behaved in a way in which you look back and think, "Why did I do that? That just was not the person I wanted to be." But that was purely because you were in your fight, flight, or freeze zone. You were what I call backed into the corner. Okay. Now, luckily, the story I told, it had a happy ending. I went to see them. I apologized for my behavior, admitted her to hospital. She got better. But we don't make good decisions when we're in that zone. We respond in ways that are destructive to ourselves, our colleagues, and our patients. So it's all about being able to manage our responses to stress. Now, why do we respond like this? You know, what's actually going on? And I'm sure you'll agree that in an ideal world, something happens, like we have a trigger, like a difficult email or something like that. We can then interpret it and think, "Oh, well, you know, they didn't really mean it, and let's write a rational response." And then we have a reaction. So that's in the ideal world. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. What happens is that we have a trigger and we go straight to our reaction without passing go, without getting to the interpretation bit. Okay. Now, why does this happen? Well, this happens because our amygdala is part of our ancient emotional reptilian brain. It's part of our limbic system that kept us safe. So it's been very useful to us. But it reacts 5 times faster than our rational human thinking brain, than our prefrontal cortex. So something happens and we have our response and our reaction before we've even worked out what's going on. We have no control over it. We have no control over this reaction. And for me, that was a real breakthrough for me, was understanding that I wasn't a bad person for having that reaction. And Dr. Steve Peters, who's a consultant psychiatrist, and he's written the Chimp Paradox, which is another brilliant book. If you've read it, just write chimp in the chat. The Chimp Paradox talks about this reaction. He says that reaction we have, our amygdala is like an inner chimp. Brilliant. So lots of people read the Chimp Paradox. And I can't stop my chimp coming out. Okay, it will come out because that's just the way my brain works. But I'm 100% responsible for what it does when it's out. Okay, so we can't control it from coming out, but we then are responsible for controlling it. So how on earth do we control it? Well, the first thing is recognizing when our chimp is out, recognizing when we're triggered. So I don't know about you, Claire, what happens when your chimp comes out? I can feel my heart beating. I can feel the heat rising. I might feel a bit tearful. How do you feel?
Probably, yeah, I'll just go straight to emotion, I think, probably. Yeah, maybe sometimes tearful, sometimes a bit shaky.
And other people watching this, pop in the chat what you feel. How do you recognize when you're triggered? I think I often feel I need to do something straight away. I need to reply straight away or do something straight away. So it's so first of all is noticing when you're in the corner and you're backed into the corner. And then you need to put a little bit of time and space between, I'll go back to the previous slide, between the trigger and the reaction, to let you have your interpretation. So if you can just put a little bit of space, then that enables you to get back to your human rational thinking brain and do a little bit of interpreting. And what we need to do is then ask ourselves, what's the story in my head here? And then what's really true? And let me give you, if I've got time, just checking time, let me give you a quick example. So in some of the Shapes Toolkit courses, we'd get somebody up and we'll say, okay, talk about a situation that regularly stresses you out at work. And often it's a GP comes up and they go, I get really stressed when I'm running late in the afternoon, when I've had a couple of difficult cases and I'm running an hour and a half late. And we say, okay, so what happens? He said, well, you know, I'm running late and everyone's getting cross with me. And we said, well, what's the story in your head? Well, the story in my head is that I'm just a rubbish doctor, that nobody else runs as late as me, that I should be able to keep up, that all the patients will be cross with me and the receptionists will be really frustrated. And we always say to them, well, when you've got that story running through your head, how are you acting? Well, when that story's going through my head, I know how I act. I get a bit tetchy with people. When patients come in and complain about the wait, I'll be very defensive and say, well, you know, I've had difficult cases. I will stay away from reception. I'll lock myself in my room working as hard and as fast as I can without going to the loo or getting a cup of tea or anything like that. And it's pretty miserable. So then we'll say to people, okay, well, what's really true in that situation? Is it true that you're a bad doctor, that everyone thinks you're rubbish, that no one else would be having these issues if they'd seen the same patients? And people will think about it and they'll go, actually, the truth is that I'm actually a good doctor. I gave the patients the time that they needed. The truth is that anybody who'd had those difficult cases would also be running behind. The truth is that, yes, the patients will be frustrated because nobody likes to be kept waiting. But actually, the truth of the situation is they want me to take the same time with other people as that they've taken with me as they've taken with other people. And yes, the receptionist may be a bit frustrated, but they don't think I'm a bad doctor. And anyone else would be in this situation, in the same situation. And when they've got that story in their head, when they've got the truth in their head, I'll say, well, how would you react then? Oh, well, I'd do something quite different then. I'd probably go into the waiting room, really apologise, say, look, I've had a couple of long cases. I will see everybody, but if you want to rebook, please do. I'll take a break when I need to. I'll go and make myself a cup of tea. When patients come in and complain about the wait, I will be gracious. I'll say, well, thank you so much for waiting, and I'm really sorry you've had the wait. And I won't have the acute stress that I would be thinking of if I had those stories about being a bad doctor running through my head. Does that make sense, Claire? Have I explained that properly?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that you sort of ask as well is who puts you in the corner, and it's yourself.
Yeah.
You put yourself in the corner. And I think for me that was quite enlightening, really, because you do have this narrative that goes on around potentially not being good enough, etc. And you know, it's that question of what's really true, which is good to reflect on, because actually it's you telling yourself that, not necessarily others' experiences. So yeah, absolutely.
And we're often our harshest critic, aren't we? And thank you so much for bringing up that point, because I forgot to say that it is 100% us that put ourselves in the corner. It's our thinking. There's a lovely quote from Eleanor Roosevelt that says, nobody can make you feel inferior without your consent. So Sophie's made a good point as well, and asked the question, how do you give yourself the space with an angry patient at the end of the phone? And yes, we didn't talk about how you give yourself space. It's very rare that people need a response immediately, unless they're collapsed in front of you and they need resuscitating. There is often options of saying, I just need to think about that and get back to you, do you mind? Or I just need to take 5 minutes just to look up some guidelines or to get a second opinion and phone somebody back. You know, if you've got an angry patient at the end of the phone, their chimp is probably out as well. They could probably do with a few minutes, some time and space to calm down. You certainly need some time and space to calm down. So phone people back. If you've been caught off the hoof in a consultation face to face, or someone's caught you in the corridor, say, I just need to think about that. Can I get back to you? If you're in a meeting, again, say, I need some time and space to think about that and just to give it some real consideration. If it's an email, do not answer it straight away, leave it overnight and then answer it the next day. There are a lot of ways to give yourself time and space. Go make yourself a cup of tea, go for a walk around the block, go to phone a friend, have a chat with a friend about something, go get a second opinion, all sorts of different ways. It's really, really important that we stop reacting so immediately and so straight away. And if you're someone that has problems saying no to people, this is a really good thing to learn, that whenever someone asks you to do something, or are you free at such and such a time, or could you do this, just say, I need to check my diary and get back to you. Okay, just buy yourself time, and then you won't be, because the temptation is to say yes because your chimp's going, I want them to like me, I want them to like me. Just say, can I get back to you? And then once your rational human thinking brain is back, you can then get back to them and give them an answer about, can you commit to that or can't you? So thank you, some really good, helpful questions there. So finally, and I'm aware we've only got 6 minutes left, take control of your work life, okay? There are things that we can do. And unfortunately, I think we have all grown up with the myth that if I only work harder and harder and harder, I will be more successful, okay? And we think that hard work leads to success, that will lead to happiness. Now, the really good news is that from all the happiness research that's gone on, actually happiness leads to productivity that leads to success. So if you are happy at work, you'll be productive and you will be successful. So that's really good news. The question is, how do we achieve that happiness at work? How do we thrive in the workplace? And I think we need to realize that actually happiness is the ultimate currency. It's not about earning as much money as possible. It's not about doing as many different shifts as we can and taking on as much as we can. But when we talk about happiness, it's about satisfaction and meaning and purpose, not just touchy-feely happiness either. And we should measure all the choices that we make in terms of how much happiness that they're going to give us, not in terms of how much money they're going to give us or how much prestige they're going to give us or anything like that. So we need to work happier rather than work harder. So how do we do that? And I think we do have these problems that we often quite isolated. And I think coronavirus has not helped in terms of isolation that some of us feel in our practices. We can be real perfectionists about everything. We can be a bit obsessive. We can feel really guilty if we're not working 24/7. So the first thing is to just ditch the guilt and ditch the I shoulds and I ought to's, and actually go for I choose to, and make some good choices about what you're choosing to do, about what roles you're going to take on and what you say yes to. Because every time you say yes, you're saying an unconscious no to something else that might come along down the line. And one thing I always get my people that I'm coaching with, and often people on courses, to do is actually plot out your working week. Get it down on a piece of paper, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, morning, afternoon, evening. How much work are you doing? Because I think you'll be surprised at how much you're doing. If you're working a 6-session job as a GP, then I wouldn't be surprised if you're working 8 or 9 sessions of actual work. And that's the way things are. And you then have the choices about what you do about that. But one choice you've got is to actually make time for that work in your week, so it's not always going into your weekend, so that you're not feeling resentful about doing it, so that you know when you're going to do it. And then you'll know when you want to schedule in your exercise, your connection time, the different roles that you have. So actually getting clear about what is it you've got in your working week. And then once you've done that, you get another blank piece of paper and you plot out what you want your week to look like. How much would you like to work? When would you like to work? When do you want everything else to go in? And the good news is I have a tool for you to do that. It's called the Thrive Week Planner. And I'm trying to put it, oh yeah, there we are. I'm just putting it in the chat for you. So you can download this. It tells you how to fill it in. It tells you how to look at it so that you can actually plan your working week, because you are in control of it. And if you don't take control, then someone else will take control of it for you. So you need to get on top of that. You need friends at work, connection. We've already talked about connection in the ways to wellbeing, but lots of people think, oh, I don't really need friends at work. I've got lots of friends outside of work, but someone told me recently that having a good friend at work puts up your life expectancy by 7 years. 7 years. And we all know that being lonely actually has the health detriment, the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So actually we spend so much time at work that getting a friend at work is really important, and it's very protective in terms of resilience and stress. And I don't know about you, but I just like someone to share my problems with and just talk to and go, what would you do about that? And, you know, have you heard about this before? And it's so much easier when you can talk about stuff. So working out how you can make some of these deeper connections at work, really, really important. And get help if you need to. Please don't do this alone. If you're a health practitioner, you can join the health, you can access a practitioner health program, and there are lots of other schemes. And like Claire said, you've got a load of stuff available in Derbyshire, is that right?
We do, we certainly do have. We've got rapid talking service from GPS for free to everybody, practice managers and GPs for sure. And we can signpost you to help and support to national organisations as well. So yeah, please get in touch with our email. Absolutely.
Yeah, do get help. There's an amazing book called I always get this wrong, The Mole, the Fox, the Horse and the Boy or something. It's in the bestseller list. It's a beautiful book. And there's one quote that the boy asks the horse, you know, what's the bravest thing you've ever done? And the horse says, the bravest thing I ever did was ask for help. I think that's really true. So don't suffer in silence, get some help. And I think also as well, do what you love. So I think many of us in general practice just think we have to do a certain thing because that's our role in the surgery. But actually these days with the advent of PCNs and these bigger practices and stuff, actually quite often we can craft our job to do more of what we're good at. The problem is many of us don't know what our strengths are. So if you can access some coaching or do an online strength survey and find out what you are good at, what you can do. I was coaching someone once who had been put in charge of clinical governance for the practice. She found that really stressful and difficult. She loved teaching. So we worked out how she could do more of teaching, and she really enjoyed that. And then went on to have a career doing much more medical education. But maybe you're really good at QI, so do that for your practice and leave some of the other stuff for other people to do. Emma's saying StrengthsFinder is fab. Yes, StrengthsFinder that's the Gallup StrengthsFinder is absolutely brilliant. You can also do a free survey, I think, called Authentic Happiness survey, which is free online. But, you know, get some coaching, find out what your strengths are and place your strengths, and you will be better at your job if you're playing to your strengths. And then finally, before we finish, and if anyone's got any questions, now is the time to pop them in the chat, because I know that some of you will have to go. Connect with what makes life worth living. And I think particularly in the coronavirus, we have just had to reevaluate life, haven't we? We've had to realise that a lot of us were maybe living lives that we weren't that happy with even before lockdown. And this was my favourite quote from lockdown, was what I'm observing currently is people are fighting for and grieving a life that made them freaking miserable. So during the crisis, don't just pivot, but evolve the way you're living your life in a more meaningful and connected way. So just ask yourself, what gives you life? What gives your life meaning? You know, what gives your life purpose? Who is important to you in life? And what is important to you at life? And how can you spend more time doing what is important to you and connecting with the people that are important to you, and connecting upwards and finding what your purpose is? Because, you know, my hope for you guys is that you will be able to feel calmer, be able to make better decisions and be successful in your work and your life. So, you know, all of these things are little things that you can do to make some of the changes that are going to help you thrive. So what I'd love you to do is write down one thing that you can do in the next week out of all the various suggestions that Claire and I have talked about on the webinar. Anything just jumps out at you that think that you can do. So write that thing down. And if anyone's got any actions they'd like to share in the chat, that would be really good as well. And think about what else would be helpful. And thank you, Joe's putting the name of that book into the chat as well, so you can look that one up. So what one thing are you going to do in the next week? So that's just a quick whiz through of you some of the shapes there. There are more shapes to explore. If you'd like to know more, do get in touch with me. There are some downloads and handouts. You might want to just take a photo of that slide Oh, good. Lisa's going to buy an alarm clock. Brilliant. Well done. Make sure it doesn't have a charger on it, so you're not tempted to charge your phone on there. There's a Zone of Power download, which includes the COVID team wellbeing toolkit, which also tells you how to do that check-in chat with your team. So you can download that there. You can download the Thrive Week Planner. Do listen to the You're Not a Frog podcast. You had some good guests on there. If you want to come on the podcast, or if you know anyone who'd be a good guest, let me know. Do get in touch with me. There's my email address there. Contact me on Twitter or LinkedIn. And yeah, let's look at some of these things people are going to do. Going to buy an alarm clock, turn off your phone in practice, schedule workouts and friends' phone calls. Brilliant. And Claire will send around the link, Mary-Lou. I'm really sorry you haven't managed to see the slides. Sophie's saying she loves the podcast. That's great. If you ever, and thank you, Vicky. She's enjoyed the session. I've noticed there's a question, if anyone has any more questions.
Yeah, Sophie asked a question earlier about the inability to control staff when you were talking about zone of power.
Ooh.
That's
an interesting. That's a really hot topic, isn't it? We can't control what we can't. I mean, unfortunately, that's the reality. We cannot control what other people do. Although there are some things that in that, when you're thinking about, say, if you're a practice manager, I can't control what other people do, but what can I do? What's in my control? So off the top of my head, Claire, and you can add to this, please, I would say I can make it really obvious what I think their roles are, what the guidelines for their jobs are in the practice, what our values are, what the standards of behaviour are. I can hold people accountable. So if people are going off piste, or if people are behaving badly, then I have meetings with them and I give them feedback about their behaviour, and I take them along the correct disciplinary procedures if I need to. So those are things I can do. What else would you say you could do?
Yeah, I think it's about promoting a positive sort of work culture. And it goes back to, I think, your sort of coaching slide that you did in a different session around influence and control. It is a fine sort of line, really, I guess. And yeah, it's like you said, that you can't lead the horse to water, but you can set the right environment for your team, and potentially empowering them to come up with some suggestions in terms of roles and expectations, such as signing the staff charter, doing a team promise, almost giving them the power to influence decisions, etc. So it's not felt all done to. There's just a few suggestions. I'm sure others have got tips as well.
Yeah, Emma's made exactly that suggestion, Claire, that, you know, asking them what they think the solutions are rather than throwing problems all the time. And that's really good. Taking a coaching approach is a very, very powerful way of getting people to, you know, take responsibility, take control, and actually come up with their own solutions. Because I think as a practice manager, it's just knackering if you're feeling you've got to fix things for people the whole time. You need to be, giving them the problems back and saying, well, what do you want to do about it? We're here to support you and we can talk it through. A really good book for that is Michael Bungay-Stanier, called The Coaching Habit. That's for leaders, managers who just want to start taking, it's got 7 really key, really simple questions in it. So that's a really helpful thing as well.
And you describe as well the coaching pentagon in your shapes toolkit as well, which is a really useful way of trying to not solve everyone's problems and empower an individual to take responsibility.
Absolutely. So the coaching pentagon's a very simple coaching framework, which really is just, you know, what we're talking about. What would you like the outcome to be? What's going on? Tell me about what's going on. And then saying, what could you do? What are the options? And then, okay, what are you going to do? So really, really simple. So yeah, looking into coaching is, I think, something that's really helpful as a manager and a leader, getting some coaching skills under your belts.
Yeah, in Derbyshire, we've been running shapes sets with practice managers and going through the coach pentagon to do that with an action learning set. So that's worked with about 5 practice managers in a session, myself and Katie Cowley, who had attended your facilitation session, Rachel. So that's progressing really well, and it's something that we're passionate about doing. So happy to take on a next cohort for action learning sets.
Oh, brilliant. Yes, you're interested, get in touch with Claire. Emma's going off to walk a dog. Thanks, Emma. Thanks for your lovely comments, everyone.
Yes,
thank you. Ruth's asking, will the webinar be available to watch again?
Absolutely, yes. We will put the link in Thursday's LMC.